All right, I'm Rick. I'm Philip. We care a lot about interoperability. As you saw in the keynote this morning, interoperability is really important. And so we want to talk about that for a little bit and give you some examples. We've each seen some interesting examples, I think, working on this that are fun to kind of go through. So first of all, I want to chat briefly about terminology here. It's easy to care about compatibility. Compatibility is making sure that your users get a good experience when they use your browser. And that is handling the existing web well. But interoperability is a little bit different. Interoperability is caring about consistency between browsers. And if your browser is popular enough, maybe web developers will kind of give you compatibility for free without interoperability. You know, they'll hack around the problems with your browser and that sort of thing. And sometimes investing in interoperability can even hurt compatibility if sites have coded for user agent specific bugs or if they've done UA sniffing. If you want to try to have browsers behave the same, you might actually at least temporarily hurt compatibility with the web. And so why would we even do that? No, I mean, compatibility is obviously important. Why would we worry about interoperability separately? So to answer that question, we have to go back a little bit. I'm just going to elaborate a little bit more on what I said in the keynote. Why do developers choose to build for the web? Well, developers are making a cost-benefit trade-off, and the benefit for them is about the users they can reach. And no other platform comes close to touching the reach of the web. But it's useful, I think, to look back and say, why does the web have such great reach? And to me, it's precisely because the web isn't controlled by any single company. Right? Competition prevents any single native platform, any single proprietary platform from becoming dominant. There's always an incentive to try to get people to switch over to your platform. But competition in the web makes the platform as a whole more dominant. You know, a new device comes out, like say the iPhone, and tries to compete with Windows or Android, but it's got to support the web, and it's actually in Apple's best interest to support the web on the iPhone. And then by doing so, they make the web more powerful also. So the web is unique in this way that interoperability actually makes the platform better and increases the draw to the customers, the developers. And this property is really unique to the web. We talk about lots of properties that we like about the web, the linkability, indexability, ephemerality. I suspect other platforms will catch up on all of those. This is the one property I don't think, it's really hard to achieve. I think it's the property that no other platform, that other platforms can't touch us on. It's really unique to the web. And we're lucky that we work on a project that was founded with this ideal in mind. That when Chromium was founded, like they ended, the comic book that explained what Chromium exists for ended with, this is our contribution, and we hope people will take some of these ideas to challenge them, build on them, and keep moving the web forward. And when we talk to our customers, like our customers, they'll talk to us about Chromium, but our customers care about the experience their users get, which means they care about the experience of multiple browsers. And so really our product isn't just Blink. Blink is just a tool to help us advance our product, which is the web platform. And it's really easy to forget about this. We get caught up in what we're working on a day-to-day basis. We're excited to ship new stuff. You know, we're excited to say, yay, our browser is awesome. Our browser is better than your browser. But in terms of our big picture of what we're trying to achieve, the way we're trying to help people organize information and get access to information, those things don't matter as much as moving the platform itself forward. But we don't always live up to that, to the goals there. So for example, you know, developers choosing the platform, like I said, is a cost-benefit trade-off. Every time a web developer has to go and debug some user agent specific issue and put some user agent specific hack into their website, that's a strike against the web platform, because they don't have to do that on other platforms mostly. Or every time another rendering engine, another browser engineer spends a bunch of their time trying to like reverse engineer behavior of another rendering engine and copy it into their browser. That again is a strike against the platform. That time could be much better spent making the platform better rather than trying to copy some stupid quirk that is important for compatibility. Occasionally, you know, if we rush a feature out and it fails to ever become interoperable, again, in the long run, that's bad for the platform. Yes, we may have scratched some short-term itch, but I mean, if you look at the features where we've done this, you know, Joshua was just mentioning file system, right? Yeah, at the time it felt really urgent, but like, you know, we probably have just enough people using those things, we can't get rid of them. but not enough to say we've really advanced the web. We failed at our mission when we've done that. And in the short term, it looks like a good idea. Or every time one of our users experiences a glitch, whether it's on our browser or another browser, every time they have a substandard user experience, they say, the web sucks compared to what I get with some other platform. These are all problems of interoperability that hurt our long-term goal.
Yeah, okay, so now we're going to go into a few war stories, some interesting things that me or Rick have been involved with. I mean, obviously there are lots of different, yeah?
Sorry, I completely forgot. I should have left a note for this. Mike from Mozilla is also here. He works on Mozilla's compatibility team, and said that he would share a little bit about the experience. Because I got passionate about this in large part by being shamed by the other browser vendors, like Robert O'Callaghan or Edge, like talking with them and them telling me about how hard things are for them and realizing like they're right.
Yeah, I came here to make you all feel shameful. No, it's like we're just as invested in interoperability. We have this touchy-feely manifesto. You can Google it, right? And a big part of our mission is to make sure the web works for everyone, right? Not just in Firefox. My job is to make sure that the web works for everyone. A big part of that is, fighting bugs against Chromium, talking with Google properties, or helping out the Edge team, etc. So
the Edge team is here as well.
Hey, great, nice to meet you guys.
We will do exactly the same speech that he just said. Same.
Yeah, okay, so let's go into some shaming stories then. I have a bunch of them, and obviously the ones we're going to tell are the ones that either me or Rick have been somewhat involved with. You can talk to anyone and you'll have more fun stories like this, but let's go. So, yeah, first, so matches and matches selector, those are APIs to test if an element matches a selector. And you know what a selector is? It's a bit put before the rules in CSS. So these APIs have by now quite a long history. Starting in 2009 to 2011, they got to a pretty good start. At the time it was called matches selector, added to the spec, really quickly got adopted in WebKit, Gecko, Trident, and Presto. And also library authors caught on. So jQuery has this selection engine, and that's part of that is Sizzle. And this functionality is important for that. And so obviously they put that in as an optimization. And so in 2011, it looked quite good. They used the unprefixed one and used all the fallbacks. At the time, it couldn't really have been any better for a feature, but quite soon they got worse. It was just a few months after all of this was lined up, the spec changed. To understand what happened here, there's something called relative selectors. It's where you don't have anything before the combinator. So there's some implicit context to that selector. And that's awesome, apparently. So new APIs that would work with relative selectors were invented. They were called find and find all at the time. These were never implemented. And so also they changed the name of matches selector to just matches, to match the other APIs, right? And because matches selector wasn't unprefixed shipped anywhere, the reasoning was that, well, let's just remove that and everyone will use matches and that'll be fine. Well, a few years passed before anyone noticed, but then some jQuery developer said, well, hey, matches selector is gone. Let's use matches instead. But then another jQuery developer said, but those don't even do the same. One uses relative selectors and one are using plain selectors. We can't just pretend those are going to do the same thing. So let's not add matches. And by the way, let's also remove matches selector because that's not in the spec anymore. So yeah, this is really game over right now. You know this is going to end now. So 2014, last year, that's when I got involved somehow in this. I saw WebKit matches selector and thought this looks easy to unprefix. By then, I didn't really know the history then, but then the definition had moved to another spec, to the DOM spec, and that definition matched the old definition of matches selector. So this whole business with relative selectors was unknown to me, just that had been renamed, and intent to implement a chip. Yeah, let's do it. And also I went around to update a lot of frameworks, including jQuery, that is Sizzle. And when I found they didn't have a fallback, of course I understood that it wouldn't matter if the name hadn't changed; it was game over. So I was still hopeful that somehow this would solve the problem, but not really. This is the use counter for the WebKit matches selector. Right after we shipped matches, and it was 30%, and a year later it was at 15%, and right now it's at 10 or something percent.
Is that percent of all pages?
That's okay. That's by the same metric as every use counter.
So
the page loads.
Yes, okay.
I mean,
because of jQuery.
So that's the prefixed method with the highest uses of any, and this is when we've shipped the unprefixed one. So there's just no chance at all that this could be removed. That became apparent. Also, Edge added support for WebKit matches selector. Oh, you got to the punchline. I should have used animations. Yeah, okay, so you see where this ends up, right? Edge adds support for this because it's needed when they pretend to be Chrome. Then Gecko wants to do the same. So on the same day, the Gecko and the spec gets WebKit matches selector. The longest of all the names is also now the most interoperable until Edge ships matches. So this is kind of sad, but I think there's something interesting to learn from this. This was the first time that I know of that the prefix API was added to a proper spec, so to say, to the DOM spec. And this is a good thing in a way. It means we can stop pretending that prefixed APIs are some other category of things. These are just APIs with really bad names. And if we need them, for interop and everyone wants to implement them, and if we just simple aliases of other things, just do it. And then, yeah, burn down the list of stuff that we don't expect and interoperable. And of course, we'll have some cases where we can't do it, but having this as an out, I think is a good thing, as long as we don't use it as option 1A.
All right, so here's a pretty simple one, but I think is kind of fun and instructive. Mouse event API, the UI event spec, has two properties: button, which tells you which button just changed, and buttons, that tells you the current state of all buttons. It's a bit mask. There's actually some useful niche scenarios, but buttons is useful in some scenarios. You can't quite do everything with corded buttons and stuff that you could get from the button API. So it's a valuable API, minor. And it's been shipping in IE since IE 9. Gecko's shipped it for a long time. It's been in the UI events spec for a long time. But as we know, Edge very much wants to pretend to be Chrome, sends a Chrome user agent string. And they are very motivated to have high compatibility. And so when they found a site that basically got confused if it ever saw a Chrome user agent string and buttons and mouse event, they said, "Oh no, for compatibility, we better unship the buttons API," which is just sad. Like, it's a useful API, and that was their plan. The plan was, we're just going to not ship this useful API because a couple websites break when we do and pretend to be Chrome. But luckily, I know the engineer that's the PM for that team, and Jacob pinged me privately and said, "This is dumb. Can you do anything to help?" And I said, "Yes, I can. This is a simple API." And I think within 5 days we had a LGTM to ship, and the plan was to ship it. It took us a little while longer. It was a relatively low priority feature, but a Samsung engineer jumped up and volunteered to implement and ship it. And within a couple of releases or so, we shipped it. And so we broke a couple of those sites. This is an example where we hurt compatibility intentionally because it was the right thing to do for the web platform. And it was a useful feature. I wanted to have it in Chrome too. I just hadn't made it a priority yet. And this is just one example. This kind of pattern comes up over and over again. I've linked to one other bug here where empty tables add 1 pixel of space in Blink. That caused no end of pain because there were sites that were broken if you didn't have that 1 pixel of space. And I forget exactly who, but somebody did a bunch of work to get rid of that. It was a huge win for interoperability, even though it hurt compatibility. So I think the big lesson here is to get to know your counterparts, the other browser engines that work on the same things that you do. Our interests are really aligned. We want the same things, and if we operate completely independently, we'll do stupid things. We absolutely will do stupid things. But when we recognize that our interests are aligned and that we're there to help each other and work together, we can move the platform forward together. Also, the other different vendors have different strengths. So for example, compatibility testing is not one of Chromium's strengths by any stretch of the imagination. But both Mozilla and Microsoft have phenomenal compat testing labs. Where they can, I've heard rumors about Edge being able to go and run like top 1 million websites and look for pixel differences, when comparing the pixels generated for Chrome and I don't know all the details, but it sounds great. And so when they file a bug for us and say, this is a problem for compatibility, or for interoperability, it tends, first of all, they tend to be right. Their prioritizations tend to be very good. And they tend to be super high quality bugs. They're reduced and they can say like, here's these sites where this specific subtle difference causes a problem and here's how it relates to the spec and that sort of thing. So we should do more to leverage that work since our interests are really aligned.
You don't have to do the compat testing anymore.
Yeah, you know what?
Is that a lesson? I'm sorry.
There's definitely better use of our time. We can have a bigger impact than building out our own compat testing system. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but and one little thing I've done here to try to make this a little bit better. We have some technical issues with our bug tracker that prevents us from having them be completely open the way WebKit and the Mozilla Firefox tracker is. But I've been able to get Anthony to allow me to approve specific people at the other browser vendors to have edit access. And so, for example, there's a handful of people on Edge and even one person from Apple and a bunch of people from Mozilla that can file bugs, set priorities, add labels like hotlist interop, CC specific people, the things that I found to be really valuable when I go and file bugs on them, especially once you start to know who the people are. That's really valuable. So in order to do this, in order to get to know your counterparts, looking at the other bug trackers, I hear a rumor that someday Edge will probably have a public bug tracker. But certainly looking at WebKit and the Mozilla bug database is really helpful. You can find the names of people who are commenting on things, at least lurking on standards lists, hearing the discussions. And lurking at standards conferences. I avoided getting into standards for so long because I didn't want to deal with like the minutia of some of the politics and the language wording and stuff like that. But everyone that goes to those things agrees that a lot of the value comes from the discussions you have over beer afterwards. And you can do a lot to move the platform forward together by just being in the right room with the right people.
Okay, so my next thing here is the full-screen APIs in plural, unfortunately. These APIs have a long and troubled history. So for spec, it's really simple. There's just one way to request full screen. But in reality, we have 4 other ways, and none of them are the per spec way. So the first set of APIs were for video only, so those are the 2 bottom ones you see here. And of course, full screen is either 1 or 2 words, so let's have both of them. And then we had the same little debacle once again, once there was a spec. Oh, let's do it first with a small s and then with a big S. So now we have 4 entry points to 2 different code paths for full screen. But so this is just for the laughs. I want to talk about a specific little issue we had with full screen. To set the stage for that, this is how you embed a video from Vimeo. It's the same for YouTube, of course. If you go to Vimeo and click this little share button, you get some embed code, you paste that into your blog or whatever, and it looks something like this. An important part is you have to use the allow full screen attribute. If you don't, the thing isn't supposed to go full screen. That's really part of the model here of the full screen spec. But then one day on BlinkDev, Ali Alabas from Microsoft told us that, hey guys, did you know when you use the video specific full screen API, you just ignore the allow full screen attributes and go full screen anyway? That's weird. Yes, I did know, and yes, that is very weird. And I got worried because it seemed pretty obvious that they had to be reverse engineering and considering copying this. So pretty quickly, I put together intent to deprecate or ship or something to just make these APIs have the same restrictions as the more generic full screen APIs. So that got its LGTMs and we shipped that. And an important point here is that wherever you find differences between a prefixed and non-prefixed API, if you can get rid of it, try to do it, because otherwise, if you're really unlucky, it could be an incentive to use the prefixed API. And also, it's a lot easier to just spec stuff if they're just exactly the same, and not have two different code paths. So that seemed like a good idea. But then Vimeo told us, hey, you broke our stuff. Turns out, they were giving this embed code to the users, and the users were putting it into their blogs or whatever. But some of these systems were stripping away attributes they didn't understand, something like that. So the allow full screen attribute wasn't there. But no problem, they had a solution for that. They just fold back to the old API. And so at least they would go full screen with a video only. They'd lose their controls and whatever, but that was better than nothing. And also a problem was that they had no way, with the change I made, they had no way of detecting that it wouldn't work. So they couldn't know if the full screen button should show up or not. So they would risk having a useless button in the UI. So second attempt here, after talking to them about exactly what they were doing and what they apparently wanted to keep using this fallback in Safari. So the second time around, we changed the WebKit supports full screen thing so they would actually tell them that it wouldn't work, and then just shipped it again. And this time it stuck. So a lesson here for me is that often when I see these kinds of reports from developers, my first gut reaction is, oh no, I wanted to remove the stuff and now they're using it in a dumb way and getting in the way. That's annoying. But that's not a healthy reaction. When you have a web developer coming to you saying that something is broken, it's likely that there are like 100 more just silently hating you. And also the whole point of this is to reduce the number of opportunities to mess up as a web developer. So yeah, it matters. And I think when you talk to them and understand the problem and then discuss the next steps with them, and you get them and you agree on them, then you build some kind of relationship, and that's useful. That's all I had to say about that, except that we still have to ship the unprefixed full screen API. Edge has done so, and it's actually, sadly enough, because these have been prefixed for so long, it's not actually safe to ship the unprefixed ones. That in itself has compat risks because people are making weird assumptions. I don't have a snippet here, but yeah, that's on the to-do list.
All right, here's a kind of more complicated one. Mike described it well as Web Compatibility's Greatest Hits Album Volume 1. This is, elements have a scroll top and scroll left property that sets or gets their scroll position. And so the question is, what element gets and sets the scroll position for the viewport, for the main document? And the CSS spec is a little bit complicated, but it's clear that if you're currently in CSS Quarks mode, then the body element controls that. But that has a bunch of downsides. It means, for example, the body actually itself can be an independently scrollable element. And there's other reasons really to say that's really not right. It's really the document element that should be the thing that controls the scroll position. That's really the root element. So outside of Quarks mode, it's supposed to be the document element. Unfortunately, WebKit never opted into that model. About 10 years ago, a bug was filed to look at fixing it, but you see this bug is still status new. And
we discovered that as well, and we had some choice words about the age of the bug.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that was a missed opportunity. It would have been easy to fix back then. And this ends up meaning like it's kind of a little thing, but it means it's something that's pretty common. It can bite new developers all the time. Something as simple as how do I scroll the document isn't interoperable. That's just crazy. I think it's worth some serious effort and pain to try to fix this. And it's a constant source of why developers have to do UA sniffing, which in general is bad for interoperability. And we've tried several times, both WebKit and Blink have tried several times to fix this, and every time we do, a whole bunch of sites are broken. And so even we had to, for a while, we had it in the experimental web platform features, and then we got a lot of bugs filed on us. You know, users often forget that they have an experimental web platform features enabled, so we just get bugs saying, you know, Facebook doesn't scroll properly. And eventually, you know, we kind of came to recognize the pattern and say, oh, is that because you have this enabled? And we had to take it out of being experimental. And then again, Edge, came to me and mentioned that they were going to have to cause this, and that made small children cry, and me, and I cried thinking that Edge was going to copy this bug. So, Facebook was the one that we heard most people complaining about. So I started talking to Facebook and saying, like, can't you just use? It's really easy. Look, it's simple. Just use window.scrollY instead of the element-based APIs. And after some nagging, they eventually said, okay, we'll fix Facebook. And eventually they got back to me and they said, okay, we fixed it, it works. I made sure I had it behind a flag. They could turn the flag on and off. They could test and make sure it works in both modes without relying on a UA sniff. But they came back and kind of this footnote, they said, by the way, this was really hard. It took us a lot of work. I was like, really? What's so hard about it? Help me understand. And it was really that a bunch of their code had this assumption that they could pass around an element that was the element that wanted to be scrolled. And there's really no way to do that well without a user agent check. And so this is where it's really important to understand the pain of web developers. It's really easy to be naive and just say, just do this. This is the right thing to do. But again, that's kind of the wrong reaction. You really want to put yourself in the shoes of a web developer. Because the easier you make it for web developers to do the right thing, the more likely they are to just do the right, to change. And if you're going to consider breaking some set of sites, you better make sure that it's going to be really easy for them to adapt. And since Alex stole so many slides from me, in Alex's talk, he just mentioned, he was talking about the importance of listening to web developers, collaborating with them, and repeating and iterating. And so there was a bit of a missed opportunity here for me, because once I solved Facebook, I went to the next most important sites on my list, which were a bunch of Google properties that were using the Closure library, which is an open source library that we have that has a public API entry point called getDocumentScrollElement that returns the element that scrolls the document. And I went, oh, shoot, this is what Facebook was talking about. There's not going to be a good way for me to do this. And I looked at, somebody built this polyfill. You could create an iframe and do some measurements and figure out which mode it was in, but it was really expensive. And I talked to the Closure engineer about it, and he just laughed in my face. He's like, no, we'll do the user agent check, thank you. And so then I had an epiphany, and I realized, first of all, I should have done this first before inflicting a bunch of pain on Facebook. But this was me putting myself in the shoes, like I was a web developer in this case. I should have probably done that first. But I realized there's an easy way out. We just need a stupid little API in the platform that says which element is the scrolling element. And it's it's a little bit useful even in an ideal world, because there's this quirks mode thing. But its only purpose really is to make it possible to migrate across this. And once you do that, this kind of code enclosure becomes trivial. It's like, just return that thing. Let me just ask the browser what it is. And so this was, I think we went from idea to my head to intent to ship and LGTMs to ship, and landed in the code in like a matter of a few days or something like that. Modulo, we had a bit of debate, tag debate about whether or not this was really good for the web platform long term. And that's still an open question. We'll see. But we're able to ship this very quickly, and Edge almost immediately after said they'd added this API, and WebKit added this API, and I think Mozilla will add it at some point too. It's less important for them because they've always done the right thing. And so the lesson here is, when you feel like you have this deadlock, like you can't fix the broken API because you break too many sites, and you can't get the sites to fix their code because they don't have a good way to detect, maybe there's just a little API you can add to the platform. It's not crazy. And so then once we did that, we had to make sure we had some really good guidance out there to help web developers test and update their code to support both. I still was hoping, the occurrence of this problem was still low enough that it was reasonable. It wasn't the 15% thing. It was still, the occasional site that would be broken by this. Luckily, major libraries like jQuery and stuff all had other workarounds that didn't rely on a user agent check. And so I worked with Simone at Opera, and he wrote this great blog post, and we did a bunch of evangelism and try to get people to ship. And then the plan was, we're just going to break sites, and the long tail that's left, and they can update. But it was a little harder than that. I recently found, I mean, it's relatively small. HTTP Archive told me 157 of the top 300 websites use this library called smoothscroll.js that gives you nice smooth scrolling. And I thought, how can this, shouldn't this be broken on other browsers too? How are they using this code? Well, it turns out that they're all doing it under a if user agent equals Chrome because they want a feature, smooth scrolling, that every other browser has had for years. And is our feature request, bug number 575, is implement smooth scroll in Chrome, filed very shortly after the Chromium project started, and we never did it. And so this is another lesson that something like smooth scrolling, this is just like animating from one scroll position to the other. It's really a UI feature, but it can be an interop issue too. As soon as if you do something that forces a web developer to write browser-specific code, that may kind of paint you into a corner. So we probably should have prioritized smooth scroll sooner. We are now. We hope to ship it by the end of this quarter or early next quarter. And then the plan is once smooth scroll is shipped, the author of that library agrees with me that they shouldn't be, that you don't want sites using that code anyway. It disables threaded scrolling. It doesn't match native scroll physics. There's all sorts of reasons why they're better off with the browser native scrolling. So once we've shipped smooth scroll and worked with, I think I found one other Google property. I think Google Inbox, I just learned, needs to be updated, but I'm confident I can get that updated. Plan is to ship, to again, try to flip scroll top left interop back to stable and ship this. And once it sticks, WebKit said that they'll change as well. So I'm still optimistic. We'll see what other surprises bite me, but I'm optimistic that we actually are going to be able to fix this long-standing interop issue. I think we're close.
Well, that's quite a war story there. So I want to talk about another bucket, another category of things. So the things we talk about so far are the ones where we already have a problem in the wild, or another browser vendor has told us that they're seeing a problem. But those cases are also going to be the ones that are harder to fix, just naturally. And so there is a lot of work that we can do proactively to fix stuff before it becomes a problem. So since the fork from WebKit, there's been a bit of this. I wouldn't say it's a huge success, but still a bit of it. We've removed a bunch of prefix APIs and also some stuff that isn't in the spec anymore, or perhaps never was in the spec. So how did this happen? Use counter anything, everything is my recipe. And what are all of these things that are easy to find and fix? Well, some of them are obviously anything that's prefixed is easy to find. So all of those almost have use counters. Also, something I've been doing a bit of is just going through all of our IDL files and finding the specs and seeing if they say the same thing. And also some specs have express it as algorithms with numbered steps. And there you can just see if you have the same steps in your implementation and perhaps annotate the implementation with the same words. So there's, wherever you look, 100 lines of code anywhere, you'll find something that isn't per spec. So it's really easy to just take 5 minutes and go look somewhere and find something that could become a problem. Perhaps at use counter, maybe just fix it directly if it seems entirely trivial. And then you just, well, there's a little bit of waiting 6 weeks, of course, to get the use counter data. But still, it's rather low effort to, and most of the things you measure won't be able to remove, but some of them will be. So sometimes the use counter data comes back and you don't like what you see. But sometimes that's because it isn't telling you what you don't want to know. Notice that on attributes on window, on document, and on event, those are just going to be hit by script enumerating or copying events, that kind of thing. So the use counters for those tell us nothing. We had some things with usage of like 5%, and those were removed without any problem, or rather moved to another place. So you also have APIs where you would expect a fallback, like prefix and non-prefix things, and as I mentioned, events. So in any of these cases, what you can do if use counters fail you is you go to HTTP archive or something similar, and you just search for your string and figure out how it's used in the wild. And if you see that, for example, in the fallback case, if you see that all of the cases that you find this also have the other form that we also have, then just it's probably safe to do it anyway. So that's a trick.
If you are a Googler, you can use Google do the same thing.
If you are a Googler.
Yeah.
So we do have an internal tool called Cookbook. It only looks at the main page of the document, so it doesn't find sub resources like JavaScript and CSS. So I've actually found it can be misleading. It'll find some. I had to do some. I ran an experiment. What's that?
It finds JavaScript, not CSS.
It finds inline JavaScript. You think it finds all JavaScript?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
It's just with the index.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have
Anyway.
tools, and you can search them somehow, and that can tell you interesting things. Also, once you've figured out that there's a problem, the solution isn't always to change Blink. Sometimes the spec is just wrong. One such case, it's just an example, is but the spec removed the stupid function called isSameNode. It just does text for equality, and it's stupid. But it had it implemented everywhere, and then the spec removed it because it's stupid, and Gecko removed it as well. And then I wanted to remove it from Blink, but API owner said no on my first API owners meeting actually. and I actually agree that was when you almost have interop, you don't give that up just to remove some stupid little thing. Also, it's easy to do this stuff. It doesn't take much time. You don't have to lose sleep over it. Your turn.
All right, one more. Touch action. Touch action is the new CSS property, part of the point event spec that we were shipping in Chrome 35. It had been shipping already. It shipped prefixed in IE 10 and then shipped unprefixed in IE 11, which meant it had been out on the wild in the web for at least 7 months before I tried to ship it in Chrome. So I thought, what could possibly go wrong? I'm just getting interoperability with IE, right? Unfortunately, 7 days before my API went stable, in fact, while we were at BlinkOn 2, I see this bug. Some random website stopped scrolling in Chrome 35. That's strange. We looked into it and eventually found several dozen. And I didn't have a good, at the time I didn't know how to use HTTP archive, so I didn't have a good measure of how many of the top whatever. I found a bunch of other examples using the Google internal tools. There's definitely a long tail of sites that were similarly broken. And it was because of one library called Hammer.js, a JavaScript-based gesture recognizer library. And it was blindly just setting touch action none on whatever element you use the library on. That's strange. Like, touch action none means disable all scrolling. Like, why is it doing that? And I went and I found a bug that had been open against this library a year ago, a year previous to this, that said, it was broken in IE 10 because it disabled all scrolling. And the response was kind of not so helpful. It was like, yeah, that's true. It's broken in IE 10. You can override the touch action yourself to avoid this being a problem. But the default is going to continue to be a problem. And then I ended up talking, Jork and I were on a panel together at EdgeConf once, and I ended up chatting with him about it. And it turns out that really the problem here was he didn't have a Windows phone. His way of testing on Windows was to go to the computer store around the corner and try one of the phones they had on display. And so he didn't really understand the real purpose of this API and didn't have a good way to experiment with the more complicated solution of actually having Hammer properly apply the API as it was intended to be used. So then wouldn't it just mean all these sites were also broken in IE? No, web developers are very, sites realized my site's broken in IE. Okay, I won't use Hammer in IE. I'll just give up swiping support in IE. so again, just because another browser supports the API doesn't mean it's necessarily web compatible. And one of the fundamental problems here, I think, is that developers at that time anyway weren't really caring about touch support in IE. They were primarily interested in touch support for mobile, and to them, mobile primarily meant iOS and Android. Maybe BlackBerry. Okay, so I worked with Jork to get an article describing how to fix it, making sure, again, you can have really simple ways to fix it. Oh, first of all, we're just about to go stable. Obviously, I reverted. I put it back to experimental so that it wasn't going to ship as part of Chrome 35 stable. And made sure there's some really good guidance that was really easy to apply. Developers are often leery of just updating the version of a library on their site. So we had two options. You could either update to the latest Hammer, or you could make this like one-line patch to the version that was already in your tree that changed just this. And I tried reaching out to a bunch of the sites that were affected. I filled in all these website contact forms while I was sitting in Zurich. I remember being at Zurich at 2 in the morning, submitting contact forms to random websites. Part of this was based on what the IE team told me had been success, or what they had done for site outreach for this kind of problem. And I basically got 0 response from all of that. But I did want to make sure that if developers hit this issue, that they would find it. So by publishing good guidance, making sure there was good discussion on Stack Overflow, that sort of thing, and making sure if you search Google for Chrome 35 Android doesn't scroll, like the top 3 search results are all about this problem, making it brain dead simple for developers to identify the problem and solve it. But still, sites weren't updated. And so we seriously were like, crap, what do we do? Maybe we just need to rename this API. Is there another name that we could have? And then we won't be interoperable with what IE is already shipped. But maybe there's some other name we could use. And we really weren't happy with that. And eventually we said, you know what? Screw it. Let's try. I think Alex and some others gave me the confidence. Alex Russell and some others gave me the confidence to say, you know what? Let's just try shipping it. And you know, within 2 weeks of shipping it, all of those sites I could not get to budge were all fixed. I didn't hear back from them. It was a simple fix. They all just got applied. And so, you know, it's dangerous, and we got to be really careful about this. But sometimes I think it's the right thing for the platform in the long run to do your best to do everything you can to make it really easy on web developers, make it easier for them to find the problems, and then just break them. I think it helped in this case that these were mobile optimized sites. They weren't the abandoned web, right? They were new mobile touch heavy sites. So they were a bit more likely to have somebody still caring about them.
Okay, just some final thoughts here. What can we do? So what you can do is if you're, there's this label called hotlist interop, and that's applied when it's a known actual issue in the wild or another browser vendor has complained. You can have a look at that and see if the areas you work in have a lot of stuff to do. And also, all of us can do some proactive stuff because that's easy. Also, when doing any of this, it's really good to get to know who the spec editors are and who's working on this in other browser vendors. And so the first thing is you need to find the right spec, and don't trust the search engine. If you find something that looks like this with a date in it, it's almost definitely not what you want. If it's something with TR, it's probably not what you want. There are exceptions, unfortunately, so it's not absolutely certain. Anyway, the nice forms of specs are the 2 top ones. That's the ones. If you find those, then you can know how to find the GitHub repo and the spec editor. And also, to find your counterparts with other browser vendors, I just use git blame to find where they haven't implemented that and who did it. Obviously, you can also use the bug trackers, as Rick mentioned. As I said before, if something looks just hopeless, like WebKit matches selector, standardize it. Now there is a spec that's kind of dedicated to picking up the slack. Mike Taylor is editing that. Ideally, you should put these things in the relevant specs, like the DOM spec. But if no one else wants to do the job, compatibility spec. Also, I thought I should mention that a huge part of the web platform is the HTML spec. And as of a few months or so, that has the process there has changed a bit. Now there are more editors, and it's easier to get your changes in there. You can also just do pull requests. One way I like to think about this, if there's a problem, is what is the fastest path to interrupt? And that's not the same question as what is the least amount of work for me, and it's most definitely not the same question as what's the nicest outcome. And WebKit matches selector is not the nicest outcome. The many other cases where something slightly ugly is going to be the most interoperable and the easiest to reach. I think you just accept that and shoot for that, because interop is more important in most cases than these little tiny details. The good questions to ask is how many browser vendors need to update? If the answer is 1, it's a good answer. If the answer is all of them, that's not good. Also, how many sites need to update, and are those sites actively maintained? As Rick said, if you're breaking the mobile web, that's probably better than breaking like the Windows 95 web, whatever we call it. So to repeat the refrain here, our mission is to advance the web platform. We have a problem. We have many problems, but a problem is that we have just a huge number of little traps that web developers can walk right into, and they're pointless. They're just pointless. It's like the difference, if you assign null to an attribute, what does it do? Those are not meaningful differences, and we have lots of them. Some are easy to fix, some are hard to fix, but there are lots of them and a lot of work to do. And the potential here, the potential is that you can actually achieve the magic of just writing it once and having it work everywhere. So that's a promise. If you have a problem, don't know what to do, ask on BlinkDev, ask in reviews, or ask us, or ask right now.
All right. I guess technically we used all of our time, but we've got break now, so we'll hang around here. Happy to have discussion and take questions. Majid?
Is there any value in kind of trying to ban these prefix APIs? I think like maybe as part of the standard process saying all the browsers should kind of try not to create these prefix APIs.
That's effectively already happened to the extent it will, right? Every Chrome, Edge, and Mozilla all agree that prefixes are a bad thing.
Yeah, so the question is who is missing from this show, right?
Apple, but what can we do?
Yeah, I mean the CSS working group tried to have some formal wording around it. It's not helpful.
Hey, I have an idea. Can you do this presentation tomorrow at WebKit conference?
I'm waiting to see. I'm waiting to see if they reply to my email to let me come.
Yeah, because it's a good presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, if you could get them to help co-author the compat spec, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean they do. The engineers I talk to, the WebKit engineers I talk to do care a lot about interoperability, but they have different challenges than we do.
They care a lot about compatibility, though. They care a lot about the not breaking things.
Yep.
Much more
than we do. And it's an opportunity. That's why we can go first in many cases. You know, Edge cares a lot more about compatibility than we do too. But we can go first, and then they can follow.
But Edge is sort of coming from the other direction, right? It's like trying to unbreak sites, whereas compatibility for us is like trying to break sites to. There's different incentives for us as well as for other people.
Well, we're trying to get everybody to the same interoperable intersection.
Right. I mean, we're sort of trying to.
Everything needs to move, including the specs and the web, and then the most movable object there is the web, right? We see a lot of these interoperability problems. It's kind of similar to toxic waste, where it's incredibly hard to remove and it takes a lot of drama. So when we can do things really, really early on, like the sorting element, it really just cuts off like a huge amount of stuff we see on the web that sort of amount of time.
So this may not necessarily translate everywhere, but one of the things we have discussions, especially with media engineers in Apple on WebKit, has been that the tip they suggested us in order to get their attention best has been get people to file radar bugs. If it is duplicate bugs, then that's good because that's their way of starting things. And make sure that the people who file bugs provide information with respect to how this is breaking things and why this is a bad experience for an Apple customer. And that, they said that like it seems trite, but they said that's the only way to truly get their attention to prioritize this. So
getting to know the engineers helps a lot too.
Absolutely.
Sometimes the specs, like we have all these people in the room and we all like feel that like interops are key goals here. Sometimes the specs don't feel that way. Spec authors see that. The SVG working group in particular.
So what working group?
SVG?
Okay.
Like who care very little about compat and actually think that like the spec is what is the source of truth, regardless of what is out in reality. There are ways to start fixing things in that area as well. Do you think?
I definitely think there are. I mean, this happened with HTML, right?
Yeah.
What's that?
Let's fire them all.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of why WebWG exists, right?
There are going to be dysfunctional working groups, but it has to be very dysfunctional before you fork the spec. But I mean, that should never be off the table, right?
Yeah. I think that should be the threat, right? If the spec's not going to represent reality, let's write a new spec that
I
represents
think it
reality.
happened once. I heard.
But I guess is that the advice to go fork the spec?
Well, I mean, have you had success with other mechanisms other than like?
Yeah, like the JavaScript spec moderately breaks a little bit of web compatibility, but it's mostly good people who are there. What should we do?
I mean, you have to honestly engage in the cost-benefit equation, right? Like maybe if it's worth, like I think the worst thing to do is keep the blinders on and say, oh, you know, everyone's going to go implement one thing even though they know the spec says something else, right? If all the implementations are doing one thing and the implementations agree, then reasonable spec editors, I think, should be able to come to agreement with the implementations, one way or another. If they can't convince the implementations to change.
We've got good success on that part. path.
Yeah.
If all the browser vendors agree and you have all the data from 40% of the web, it's really hard to have an argument of spec purity. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you give them concrete data. When it's not just hearsay. When you say, like, look, we tried changing this and we saw this much breakage, or we did an HTTP archive search and we see this percentage of breakage. It's too high. We're never going to do this. And editors tend to be pretty responsive to that.
So a while ago, Adam Barth sent a graph where he explained that basically when Blink should ship things that are very scary for compatibility, mostly for compatibility, like shipping new APIs that do not have yet like buy-in across the board, if they actually add a lot of value to the platform. Is it something that you guys still agree on?
Yeah, there's definitely a trade-off here. Remember, in the keynote I mentioned that there's a tension between pushing the web forward quickly and maintaining interoperability. And I think it's one of the reasons why it's great that there's multiple browser vendors, is that we have different roles in the ecosystem. And I like to be able to tell people, you know what, if this, like, when there's really niche, like, enterprise use case scenarios that we're going to break, we have one or two noisy customers, I'm fine saying, you know what, IE is probably a better browser for you guys. You know?
So basically, I feel like we're creating a problem and trying to solve it at the same time.
Yeah,
absolutely. Someone has to move first, so that's obvious, right? So it's just a question of weighing how likely is it that everyone else is going to follow. And I mean, this is the intent to ship thing, where we just have to guess a bit how scary this is. And if someone says explicitly this is a terrible idea, and that's a strong signal to think hard. But I don't know if there's like a recipe for it.
Alex Russell just gave a Fizz talk, right? I think he gave great advice there, right? It's about, you've got to do the work in the open. You've got to be open to feedback and try to do your best to accommodate that feedback. But we can't afford to wait for, if there's crickets, we should just ship. We can't afford to always be waiting for other people. I mean, it depends, right? It's a trade-off, right? I think Dimitri wrote some stuff about the trade-off between how much does it advance the web versus what risk are we taking. And that's the main thing we debate, I think, in API owners is what's the cost benefit trade-off here? It's tough. I don't think there's any easy answer.
And we certainly got it wrong a bunch of times.
Yep. We're definitely going to get it wrong, and we'll learn from it.
Do you see a gap in the kind of the feedback loop that we have with the developers? Like, I think there was also mentioned in the state of Blink that we need to actually have a feedback loop for performance, but I think also for the API compact, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. One thing we definitely aren't good at is letting people know. Even if we deprecate stuff in the console for 2 release cycles, there's just not a very high chance that anyone's going to see that. That's not an effective means of communication.
Hey, maybe we should invite actual developers to BlinkOn one day.
Yeah, but how are we going to get the 0.01% that were relevant to that use counter? That's really the.
I've got him on my smile pad.
Yeah, okay.
The same people every time.
In some cases, you know them. But
there's definitely, I think there's an opportunity to do more there for sure.
There's been talk about surfacing that Google Web Messages or something. Something like that might be cool if you can like go and see what's gonna break on their web properties.
Yeah, I mean, people, for example, look at their Google Web Analytics, but probably the contact form on the website goes a completely different type of person than the actual developer.
It would be great if we had a channel like that. Maybe not just Google Analytics. Maybe we have an open system where we can publish data, and then different libraries like Google Analytics can pull from that and surface it to their users.
We've somewhat jokingly suggested in the past that if you use a deprecated API, we'll make your page render in black and white. That might be a way to give you a year or two to change.
Yeah.
I think that's the deprecation pony thing. Remember that one? That was a long
deprecation pony?
That if you use a deprecated API, a pony.
So there is an attempt to solve that reminds me, there's an attempt to solve the shipping thing, which is this experimental API thing.
I'm aware of that.
Right. So that's like that's a separate issue from this, in that
it's still slightly different.
I got feedback